The old pickup truck wheezed to a stop at the entrance of Cedar Ridge Ranch, its engine coughing like an old man with too many cigarettes behind him. Through the dusty windshield, Emma Collins stared at the weathered wooden sign that read Cedar Ridge SD 1952 in faded paint that had seen better decades. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from the mountain cold, but from the weight of desperation that had driven her here to this remote corner of Colorado. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the back seat, 6-month-old Lucy wailed with the kind of relentless crying that made strangers in grocery stores shoot disapproving glances. The baby had been crying for 3 hours straight, ever since they'd stopped at that last gas station, where the attendant had looked at Emma like she was some kind of vagrant. Which, she supposed, she was now. The diaper bag was nearly empty, her wallet held exactly $43 and some change, and the fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. But it wasn't just the baby causing the commotion. In the truck bed, secured by a makeshift pen of chicken wire and hope, was Rosie. The pig weighed about 60 pounds of pure stubbornness and had the peculiar habit of keeping herself meticulously clean. While most pigs would be rolling in mud and loving every minute of it, Rosie acted more like a prissy house cat, avoiding dirt with an almost human-like disdain. She'd been Emma's grandmother's pet, the old woman's pride and joy, and the only thing of value Emma had left in the world besides her crying daughter. Emma had driven for 16 hours straight from Phoenix, running on gas station coffee and sheer determination. The last of her savings had gone to keeping the lights on in their tiny apartment for 1 more month, but when the eviction notice came anyway, she'd packed everything they owned into garbage bags and loaded up the truck. She'd heard about Cedar Ridge Ranch from a trucker at a diner outside Flagstaff. He'd mentioned it was owned by some cowboy who sometimes hired seasonal help, no questions asked. It wasn't much to go on, but it was the only lead she had. The ranch stretched out before her like something from a postcard, if postcards showed places where hope went to die. Rolling hills covered in autumn grass led up to snow-capped peaks that looked impossibly tall against the October sky. Wooden fences lined the dirt road, most in good repair, suggesting this wasn't some abandoned property. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and she could make out the shapes of horses near a red barn that had seen better years but still stood proud against the mountain backdrop. As her truck rumbled down the long driveway, kicking up dust clouds that danced in the late afternoon sunlight, Emma caught sight of a figure near the main house. Even from a distance, she could tell he was tall, probably in his early 30s, wearing the kind of worn jeans and flannel shirt that suggested he actually worked the land rather than just playing dress-up cowboy. A black cowboy hat sat low on his head, and he was leading a chestnut horse toward the barn with the easy confidence of someone who'd been doing it his whole life. Lucy's crying reached a new crescendo, causing Rosie to grunt in obvious annoyance from the truck bed. The pig had somehow managed to keep her pink skin spotless during the entire journey, which was more than Emma could say for herself. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rearview mirror and winced. Her dark hair had escaped its ponytail hours ago, hanging in limp strands around a face that looked older than her 26 years. Her white t-shirt bore the evidence of Lucy's last feeding disaster, and she was pretty sure she smelled like a combination of baby formula, gas station restrooms, and desperation. The cowboy had stopped what he was doing and was watching her approach with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust unexpected visitors. Emma's stomach clenched with anxiety. This was it. This was her last shot at finding somewhere safe for her and Lucy to land. If this didn't work out, she'd be sleeping in the truck tonight, and winter was coming fast to the Colorado mountains. She pulled to a stop about 20 feet from where the cowboy stood, the truck's engine giving one final shudder before falling silent. For a moment, the only sounds were Lucy's continued crying and Rosie's occasional snorts of displeasure. Emma took a deep breath, trying to summon courage she didn't feel, and opened the truck door. "Ma'am," the cowboy said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed automatic. His voice was deep, with the kind of Western drawl that sounded genuine rather than put on. "You lost?" Emma climbed out of the truck, her legs stiff from the long drive. Up close, she could see that the cowboy was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of stormy skies. There was something about his face that suggested he'd seen his share of troubles, but there was kindness there too, buried beneath layers of natural caution. "I'm looking for work," Emma said, her voice hoarser than she'd intended. "I heard you might need seasonal help." The cowboy's eyes flicked to the crying baby visible through the truck's back window, then to Rosie, who was standing in her makeshift pen looking dignified despite her circumstances. "I'm Marcus Webb," he said after a moment. "This is my ranch. And you are?" "Emma Collins. This is my daughter Lucy. And that's Rosie." She gestured toward the pig, who chose that moment to emit a sound that was somewhere between a grunt and a sigh of resignation. Marcus walked closer to the truck, his movements careful and measured. "That's an unusual traveling companion," he observed, nodding toward Rosie. "Most pigs I know would be covered in mud by now, especially after a long trip." "Rosie's different," Emma said, feeling the need to defend her grandmother's beloved pet. "She was my grandmother's pig. Raised her from a piglet. Rosie thinks she's people, I guess. Won't roll in mud, won't eat slop. She's cleaner than most humans I know." A ghost of a smile touched Marcus's lips. "And the baby?" "She's teething," Emma said, though that was only part of the reason for Lucy's distress. The truth was, Lucy had been fussy for weeks, ever since Emma had made the decision to leave Phoenix. Babies, Emma had learned, were remarkably sensitive to their mother's stress levels. "She's normally much better behaved than this." Marcus studied Emma for a long moment, taking in her obvious exhaustion, the desperation she was trying so hard to hide, and the way she unconsciously swayed on her feet like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Where you coming from?" "Phoenix," Emma said. "We've been driving since yesterday." "That's a long way to come looking for ranch work, especially with a baby and a pig." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. She knew how it looked, how crazy the whole situation must seem to this stranger. A young woman with a crying baby and a prissy pig showing up at his ranch with no notice, asking for work she probably wasn't qualified for. But she was here now, and she had nothing left to lose. "Look, Mr. Webb, I know this seems unusual, but I'm a hard worker. I grew up on a small farm in Kansas before my parents died. I know how to handle animals, fix fences, whatever you need. I just need a chance." Lucy's crying reached a new peak, the sound echoing across the ranch yard. Rosie responded with an indignant snort, as if to say she'd had quite enough of this nonsense. Marcus glanced toward the house, then back at Emma. "When's the last time you fed her?" he asked, nodding toward the truck. "About 2 hours ago, but she wouldn't take much. She's been like this all day." Marcus walked to the truck and peered through the back window at Lucy, who was red-faced and flailing in her car seat. Something in his expression softened. "Mind if I take a look?" Emma hesitated. She'd been on her own with Lucy for so long. Trusting her daughter to strangers didn't come naturally. But there was something about Marcus Webb that seemed solid, trustworthy. Maybe it was the way he'd approached Rosie without fear or mockery, or the genuine concern in his voice when he'd asked about Lucy. "Okay," she said, opening the back door. Marcus leaned into the truck, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he unbuckled Lucy from her car seat. The baby's crying didn't stop, but it seemed to lessen slightly as he lifted her out. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, his voice taking on a soothing quality Emma hadn't expected. "What's got you so upset?" Lucy was tiny in his arms, her face still red and streaked with tears, but she seemed to respond to his calm presence. Marcus held her against his chest, rocking slightly as he examined her with the attention of someone who actually knew something about babies. "She's warm," he said, looking at Emma with concern. "When's the last time she had a proper meal?" Emma felt a stab of guilt. "This morning, I think. Maybe yesterday evening. Time's been kind of a blur." "And when's the last time you had a proper meal?" The question caught Emma off guard. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked about her welfare. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Marcus gave her a look that suggested he wasn't buying that for a second. "You're swaying on your feet, ma'am. When's the last time you slept?" Emma wanted to lie, to maintain the fiction that she had everything under control, but the exhaustion was so overwhelming she couldn't even remember what day it was. I dozed a little at a rest stop outside Grand Junction. Maybe 3 hours. Marcus continued to rock Lucy, who had quieted to occasional hiccups and sniffles. You can't take care of a baby if you don't take care of yourself first. Basic rule of survival. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. From the truck bed, Rosie let out a sound that might have been agreement. Marcus glanced at the pig, who was somehow managing to look both dignified and disapproving despite being confined to a makeshift pen. She really doesn't like mud, does she? Marcus observed. Hates it, Emma confirmed. My grandmother used to say Rosie was born thinking she was a princess. She'll eat table scraps, but only if they're served on a clean plate. She sleeps on a blanket, and if it gets dirty, she'll refuse to use it until it's washed. Sounds high maintenance. She is, but she's all I have left of my grandmother. And she's actually pretty smart. Knows her name. Comes when called. House-trained. She's more like a dog than a pig, really. Marcus looked thoughtful as he continued to soothe Lucy, who had finally stopped crying and was now making soft cooing sounds. I've got a mare in the barn who's the same way about her stall. Won't sleep in it if there's so much as a piece of straw out of place. Animals have personalities, just like people. Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Marcus Webb wasn't going to turn her away immediately. Maybe he was actually considering giving her a chance. Mr. Webb, she began, but he cut her off. Marcus, he said, and before you ask again about work, let's get some immediate needs taken care of. This baby needs food and a clean diaper, you need sleep, and that pig needs proper accommodations. We can talk about employment after everyone's basic needs are met. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. It was such a simple offer of basic human kindness, but she'd been on her own for so long that it hit her like a physical blow. I can pay, she said quickly. I've got some money. Marcus shook his head. Save your money. You're going to need it. He started walking toward the house, still carrying Lucy. Come on. Let's get you all settled. Emma grabbed the diaper bag and a few essential items from the truck, then followed Marcus toward the ranch house. It was a sprawling structure that looked like it had grown organically over the decades, with additions and modifications that somehow managed to look cohesive, despite their obvious different eras of construction. The wraparound porch was lined with rocking chairs, and hanging baskets filled with autumn flowers added splashes of color against the weathered wood siding. What about Rosie? Emma asked, glancing back at the truck. We'll get her sorted out after we take care of the immediate crisis, Marcus said, climbing the porch steps. I've got a clean pen behind the barn that should suit a pig with refined tastes. The front door opened directly into a large living room that managed to be both masculine and welcoming. Leather furniture that had seen years of use but was well maintained, Native American rugs on hardwood floors, and walls lined with bookshelves and photographs of ranch life. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and Emma could smell the lingering scent of wood smoke and coffee. Kitchen's through here, Marcus said, leading her toward the back of the house. I've got formula if you need it, and the stove works if you want to warm a bottle. Emma stopped in her tracks. You have formula? Marcus paused, Lucy still content in his arms. My sister visits sometimes with her kids. I keep supplies on hand. He didn't elaborate, but Emma caught something in his tone that suggested there was more to the story. The kitchen was spacious and functional, with granite countertops and appliances that looked expensive but not showy. Everything was meticulously clean, which surprised Emma. Most bachelors she'd known lived in varying degrees of squalor. I'll warm a bottle, Marcus said, settling Lucy into a high chair that Emma was certain hadn't been there when they'd first walked in. Where had it come from? There's sandwich fixings in the fridge if you want something to eat. Emma wanted to protest that she was fine, that she didn't need his charity, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal, and Lucy needed her to be strong. Thank you, she said quietly, moving toward the refrigerator. As she made herself a sandwich with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and relief, Emma found herself stealing glances at Marcus. He moved around the kitchen with easy confidence, testing the temperature of Lucy's formula on his wrist before offering it to the baby, who took it eagerly. There was something about the way he held her daughter that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd fed a baby. "You're good with her," Emma observed. Marcus shrugged. "Kids aren't that complicated. They need food, sleep, and to feel safe. Most of their problems come from not having one of those three things." Lucy was drinking her bottle contentedly now, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep. Emma felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as she watched her daughter finally relax. "She's been so fussy lately," Emma said, taking a bite of her sandwich. It was just turkey and cheese, but it tasted like the best meal she'd ever had. "I was starting to think there was something wrong with her." "Babies pick up on stress," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "You've been running on adrenaline and worry for who knows how long. She's been feeling all of that." Emma nodded, unable to trust her voice. He was right, of course. She'd been so focused on keeping them both alive and fed and housed that she hadn't considered how her own emotional state might be affecting Lucy. "Where's her father?" Marcus asked quietly. Emma's hand tightened around her sandwich. "Not in the picture. Never was, really." Marcus nodded without judgment. "That's hard, doing it all on your own." "I managed okay for a while," Emma said. "I had a job at a diner in Phoenix, and my grandmother helped with babysitting. But when Grandma died 6 months ago, everything fell apart. I couldn't afford daycare on what the diner paid, and I couldn't work without childcare. It was like being caught in quicksand." "What about family?" "Just me and Lucy now. My parents died in a car accident when I was 18. Grandma Rose was all I had left, and when she passed..." Emma's voice trailed off. She'd cried enough tears over the past 6 months to fill one of Colorado's mountain lakes. Marcus finished feeding Lucy, who had dozed off in his arms, with the peaceful expression that only truly content babies achieved. "I'll put her down somewhere safe," he said, standing carefully so as not to wake her. "I can take her," Emma started to say, but Marcus shook his head. "Finish your food. You need the energy more than she needs you right now." He disappeared down a hallway, and Emma could hear him moving around in what sounded like a bedroom. When he returned a few minutes later, his hands were empty and there was a baby monitor clipped to his belt. "She's in the guest room," he said. "Should sleep for a while now that she's got a full belly." Emma stared at him. "You just happen to have a baby monitor?" Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "Like I said, my sister visits." There was definitely more to that story, but Emma was too grateful and too tired to press for details. "I should check on Rosie," she said, standing up from the kitchen table. "Already done," Marcus said. "Moved her to the pen behind the barn while you were eating. She's got fresh water, clean straw, and I found some vegetable scraps she might like." She seemed pleased with the accommodations. Emma felt another wave of overwhelming gratitude. When was the last time someone had anticipated her needs, taken care of the little details that always seemed to fall to her? You didn't have to do all that. No, but it needed doing, and you needed to eat. Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, studying her with those storm-colored eyes. "Now, about work. What kind of experience do you actually have?" Emma straightened, trying to summon some professional confidence despite the fact that she probably looked like a disaster. "I grew up on a small farm in Kansas. Helped my dad with cattle, horses, general maintenance. After my parents died, I worked on a ranch outside Topeka for 2 years before I moved to Phoenix. I can handle livestock, fix basic equipment, do whatever needs doing." "Why'd you leave Kansas?" Emma hesitated. The truth was complicated and painful, involving a ranch foreman who thought Emma's grief made her easy prey, and a confrontation that had ended with her threatening him with a pitchfork. "Personal reasons," she said finally. Marcus seemed to understand that was all the explanation she was willing to give. "This is a working cattle ranch. We run about 500 head on 3,000 acres. It's just me and 2 other hands most of the time, 3 during calving season. The work's hard, the hours are long, and the pay isn't great. I'm not afraid of hard work. What about childcare? You can't work cattle with a baby strapped to your back." Emma's heart sank. She'd been so focused on finding work that she hadn't thought through the practical details. I'll figure something out. Maybe there's someone in town who could help. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Emma could see him weighing options in his mind. There's a small cabin about half a mile from here, he said finally. It's basic, but it's got electricity, running water, a wood stove for heat. Previous owner used it for hunting trips. It's not fancy, but it's private, and it's safe. Emma's pulse quickened. You're offering me a place to stay? I'm offering you a trial period, Marcus said carefully. 1 month. You help out around the ranch, and I'll provide housing and basic supplies. If it works out for both of us, we can talk about a more permanent arrangement. What about Rosie? Pig can stay as long as she doesn't cause problems. Though I have to ask, what's your long-term plan for her? She's not exactly typical ranch livestock. Emma had been dreading this question. I know she's not practical. I know I should probably sell her or find her a home somewhere, but she's all I have left of my grandmother. She raised Rosie from a piglet, treated her like a pet. I can't just abandon her. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand about holding on to things that connect us to people we've lost. The pig can stay. Emma felt tears threatening again. Just like that? Just like that. But there are conditions. Emma tensed. Here it comes, she thought. The catch that makes this whole thing impossible. You and the baby stay clean, Marcus said, his tone serious but not unkind. I don't mean spotless. I mean healthy. You eat regular meals, you get proper sleep, you take care of yourself and your daughter. I won't have a woman and baby living on my property if they're not being properly cared for. Emma blinked in surprise. That wasn't the kind of condition she'd been expecting. That's it? That's it. Well, that and you do your share of the work. I'm not running a charity here. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired, Emma promised, meaning every word. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his whole face. I believe you will. Now, let's get you and your gear moved to the cabin before that baby wakes up wanting another bottle. As they walked back outside, Emma caught sight of Rosie in her new pen. The pig had arranged the clean straw into what looked suspiciously like a nest, and was lying in it with the satisfied air of royalty, who had finally found acceptable accommodations. She looked up as they approached, and made a soft sound that Emma had learned to interpret as approval. She likes it here, Emma said, surprised by how much that mattered to her. Animals know when they're in a good place, Marcus replied. They can sense it better than people sometimes. Emma looked around the ranch, taking in the rolling hills, the well-maintained buildings, the sense of peace that seemed to emanate from the land itself. For the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. Why are you doing this? She asked as they began unloading her meager possessions from the truck. You don't know anything about me. I could be a terrible worker, or crazy, or running from the law. Marcus hefted one of her garbage bags over his shoulder with ease. Could be. But I don't think you are. You're running from something, but I don't think it's the law. You're desperate, but you're not broken. And any woman who travels across 3 states with a crying baby and a prissy pig just to find honest work is someone worth taking a chance on. Emma stared at him, wondering how he'd managed to see so clearly through her carefully constructed walls. How do you know I'm not broken? Marcus paused in his loading, meeting her eyes directly. Because broken people don't fight as hard as you've been fighting. They give up. You're still here, still trying, still putting your daughter's needs before your own comfort. That's not broken, Emma. That's strong. As they finished loading her belongings into Marcus's pickup truck for the short drive to the cabin, Emma felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since her grandmother's death, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she and Lucy were going to be okay. The cabin was indeed basic, but it was clean and sturdy, with a small living area, a tiny kitchen, 1 bedroom and a bathroom that had seen better days but functioned perfectly well. There was a wood stove in the main room and enough furniture to be comfortable. Most importantly, it felt safe. There's firewood stacked on the side porch. Marcus said as they carried her belongings inside. "Propane tank for the stove is full. If you need anything, the main house is just down the road." Emma set down the pack-and-play that would serve as Lucy's bed and looked around the small space that was already starting to feel like home. "Marcus, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said with a grin. "Wait until you've seen what ranch work actually entails. You might be cursing my name by the end of the week." "I doubt that." Marcus headed toward the door, then paused. "Emma? That thing about staying clean, I meant it. Not just for you, but for Lucy. If I think either of you isn't being properly cared for, the deal's off." Emma nodded. "I understand." "Good. I'll be by around sunrise to show you around, explain what needs doing, try to get some rest." After he left, Emma sat in the small living room and listened to the absolute silence of the Colorado mountains. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Just the sound of wind in the pine trees and the distant lowing of cattle. Lucy stirred in her pack-and-play, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. Emma went to her daughter, lifting her gently and carrying her to the window that looked out over the ranch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful to be real. "Look, Lucy," Emma whispered, pointing toward the window. "This might be home." Lucy gurgled contentedly, her tiny hand reaching toward the glass as if she was trying to touch the mountains themselves. For the first time in months, she seemed truly peaceful. Emma held her daughter close and allowed herself to believe that maybe their luck had finally changed. Tomorrow would bring hard work and new challenges, but tonight they were safe, fed, and warm. Tonight, that was enough. Outside their window, the ranch settled into evening quiet, and somewhere in the distance, Emma could swear she heard Rosie making contented pig sounds from her clean pen behind the barn. The rooster's crow pierced through Emma's dreams at 5:30 in the morning, dragging her from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, the unfamiliar surroundings of the cabin causing a flutter of panic before memory returned. Colorado, the ranch, Marcus Webb, and his unexpected kindness. Lucy was still sleeping peacefully in her pack-and-play, her tiny chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm that meant she was truly at rest. Emma allowed herself a few minutes to simply watch her daughter sleep, marveling at how different Lucy looked when she wasn't crying or fussing. The baby's face was relaxed, her cheeks had regained some of their healthy pink color, and she looked like what she was supposed to be. A normal, healthy 6-month-old instead of the stressed, overtired infant she'd become during their desperate journey. Emma dressed quietly in her most practical clothes, jeans that had seen better days but were still sturdy, work boots that had gotten her through her last ranch job in Kansas, and a flannel shirt that had belonged to her father. As she pulled her hair back into a ponytail, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the cabin's dresser. She still looked tired, but the haunted desperation that had shadowed her features for months seemed to have lessened overnight. A soft knock at the cabin door announced Marcus's arrival. Emma opened it to find him standing on the small porch, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee and looking like he'd been awake for hours. His dark hair was slightly damp, suggesting he'd already showered, and his clothes were clean but practical. The uniform of a working rancher rather than someone playing dress-up cowboy. "Morning," he said, offering her one of the mugs. "Figured you might need this." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic and inhaling the rich aroma. "You didn't have to bring me coffee." "Didn't have to, but ranch work starts early, and coffee makes everything more bearable." Marcus glanced past her toward where Lucy was still sleeping. "How'd she do last night?" "She slept straight through. First time in weeks." Emma took a sip of the coffee and nearly groaned with pleasure. It was strong and perfectly brewed, exactly what she needed to face whatever challenges the day might bring. "What about Rosie?" Marcus's mouth quirked upward in what might have been amusement. "Your pig has made herself quite at home. When I checked on her this morning, she'd somehow managed to arrange her water bowl, food dish, and bedding area in perfect geometric alignment. Never seen anything like it." Emma couldn't help but smile. "That sounds like Rosie," My grandmother used to say she had obsessive-compulsive disorder, if pigs could have such things. Everything has to be exactly the way she wants it, or she gets upset. Well, she seems content enough now. Ready to see what you've gotten yourself into? Emma glanced back at Lucy, who was still sleeping soundly. Is it okay to leave her? I don't want to be a problem before I've even started. Bring the monitor, Marcus said, nodding toward the baby monitor he'd provided the night before. We'll stay close to the cabin for the first few hours, and if she wakes up, you can come back. Part of the arrangement, remember? Taking care of yourself and her comes first. They stepped out into the crisp mountain morning, and Emma was struck again by the sheer beauty of the place. The sun was just cresting the eastern peaks, painting the ranch in golden light that made everything look like a photograph from a travel magazine. The air was clean and sharp, carrying the scents of pine, grass, and the distant smell of livestock. Cedar Ridge has been in my family for 3 generations, Marcus said as they walked toward the main ranch buildings. My grandfather started it in 1952 with 50 head of cattle and more determination than sense. My father expanded it, and when he passed 5 years ago, it became mine. Emma noticed the slight tightening around his eyes when he mentioned his father's death. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching. Some days I still find myself wanting to ask his advice about something. Marcus paused at the entrance to the barn, a massive structure that looked like it had been built to last centuries. This time of year, most of the work is getting ready for winter. Cattle need to be moved to lower pastures. Equipment needs maintenance. Fences need repairs before the snow hits. The barn was impressive, with high ceilings supported by massive wooden beams and stalls that were spacious and well-maintained. Emma could see several horses looking curiously at them over their stall doors, and the familiar sounds and smells of a working barn made her feel more at home than she had in months. This is Whiskey, Marcus said, stopping at the first stall to pat the neck of a large bay gelding. He's my primary riding horse. Steady, reliable, doesn't get excited about much. Next to him is Dakota, my cutting horse. She's faster, but more temperamental. As they moved down the line of stalls, Marcus introduced Emma to each horse with the kind of casual affection that spoke of years of partnership. There was Pepper, an older mare who served as the ranch's babysitter horse for inexperienced riders. Storm, a young stallion with more energy than sense. Belle, a gentle giant of a draft horse who helped with heavy work around the ranch. Do you ride? Marcus asked as they reached the end of the barn. I used to, back in Kansas. Haven't been on a horse in a few years, but I imagine it's like riding a bicycle. Emma reached out to stroke Belle's massive nose, and the draft horse nickered softly in response. She's beautiful. Belle's special. She was a rescue, actually. Previous owner was going to put her down because she had some lameness issues, but my father thought she deserved a chance. Turned out she just needed proper care and some time to heal. Now she's one of the most valuable animals on the ranch. Emma heard the story within the story and wondered if Marcus saw the parallel. Like Belle, she and Lucy had needed rescuing, and Marcus had given them a chance when others might not have. They left the barn and walked toward a large paddock where several cattle were gathered around a feeding trough. The animals looked healthy and well cared for, their coats glossy in the morning sunlight. We run mostly Angus with some Hereford crosses, Marcus explained. Beef cattle, hardy enough for mountain winters but good producers. Right now, we're supplementing their grazing with hay since the grass is starting to die back for the season. Emma watched the cattle with the practiced eye of someone who'd grown up around livestock. The animals looked content and unstressed, moving slowly and deliberately as they ate. They look good, healthy. We work hard to keep them that way. Disease prevention is a lot cheaper than treatment, and happier cattle are more productive cattle. Marcus leaned against the fence, his posture relaxed, but his eyes constantly scanning the herd. What's your experience with cattle work? Basic stuff mostly. Helped move herds, assisted with vaccinations and health checks, some experience with calving season. My dad always said I had good instincts with livestock. Marcus nodded approvingly. Instincts matter more than experience sometimes. You can teach someone the technical skills, but you can't teach them how to read animals. A movement near the barn caught Emma's attention, and she turned to see Rosie emerge from behind the building, walking with the dignified pace of a queen surveying her domain. The pig had somehow managed to keep herself spotlessly clean despite spending the night outdoors, and she moved with purpose toward a patch of sunlight near the fence. "Does she always do that?" Marcus asked, watching as Rosie carefully arranged herself in the sunny spot, lying down with what appeared to be a contented sigh. "Every morning. Rosie has routines, and she doesn't like them disrupted. Morning sunbath, then breakfast, then a walk around whatever space she's in to make sure everything is as it should be." Emma watched her grandmother's pig with affection, mixed with exasperation. "She's more high maintenance than most people I know." "Nothing wrong with having standards," Marcus said, and Emma caught something in his tone that suggested he might be talking about more than just pig behavior. They spent the next 2 hours touring the ranch, with Marcus explaining the daily routines, seasonal cycles, and long-term goals that kept Cedar Ridge functioning. Emma found herself falling back into the rhythm of ranch life more easily than she'd expected. The physical work felt good after months of the sedentary stress of unemployment and worry. Her muscles remembered the motions, her hands remembered the feel of tools and rope, and the thousand small tasks that made up a rancher's day. When the baby monitor crackled to life with Lucy's waking sounds, Emma felt a moment of panic. She'd been so absorbed in learning about the ranch that she'd almost forgotten about her daughter. "Go," Marcus said simply. "Take care of her. I'll be working on fence repairs in the south pasture when you're ready." Emma hurried back to the cabin, where Lucy was awake and alert but not crying. The baby smiled when she saw her mother, a sight that never failed to make Emma's heart skip a beat. After changing Lucy's diaper and warming a bottle, Emma settled into the cabin's one comfortable chair to feed her daughter. "What do you think, Lucy?" she asked softly as the baby drank her formula. "Think we might like it here?" Lucy's response was to reach up with one tiny hand and grab a strand of Emma's hair, holding on as if to say she wasn't planning to let go anytime soon. After Lucy was fed and content, Emma strapped her into the portable car seat and carried her outside. She'd noticed a shaded area near the cabin that would be perfect for the baby to nap while Emma worked nearby. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than leaving Lucy alone, and Marcus had seemed understanding about the challenges of working while caring for an infant. She found Marcus exactly where he'd said he'd be, replacing broken fence posts in a pasture about a quarter-mile from the main buildings. He looked up as she approached, his gaze taking in the baby carrier and the determined set of Emma's shoulders. "She okay?" he asked, setting down his post-hole digger. "She's fine, fed and content for now. I thought maybe I could help with the fence work while she naps." Marcus studied the setup Emma had created. Lucy's carrier positioned in the shade of a large oak tree, within easy sight and hearing distance of where they'd be working. "That'll work for now, but what happens when winter comes? Can't have a baby outside in Colorado snow." Emma felt her stomach clench. She'd been so focused on proving herself today that she hadn't thought ahead to the practical challenges that winter would bring. "I'll figure something out." "I'm sure you will," Marcus said, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was already thinking about solutions. "For now, let's see how you handle fence work." The next several hours passed in comfortable, productive work. Emma's hands remembered the rhythm of fence repair, and she found herself falling into an easy partnership with Marcus. He was a good teacher, patient but not condescending, willing to let her figure things out for herself while being ready to step in if she needed help. Lucy slept peacefully in her carrier, occasionally stirring but never fully waking. The baby seemed to find the outdoor sounds soothing, birds singing, cattle lowing in the distance, the rhythmic sounds of work being done. "You aren't kidding about knowing your way around ranch work," Marcus observed as they finished replacing a particularly stubborn fence post. "Where in Kansas did you say you were from?" "Small town called Cedar Point. My parents had about 100 acres, ran cattle, and grew some corn. Nothing fancy, but it was home." Emma wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her glove. "After they died, I couldn't afford to keep the place, sold it, and worked for other ranchers until—" "Until what?" Emma hesitated, then decided that honesty was probably the best policy with Marcus Webb. "Until I had some trouble with a foreman who thought a grieving 19-year-old was easy prey. I convinced him otherwise, but it seemed like a good time to leave Kansas." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, Sorry you had to deal with that. It was a long time ago. I learned to take care of myself. Yeah, I can see that. Marcus began gathering up their tools. Let's head back. It's almost lunchtime, and I imagine Miss Lucy will be wanting another bottle soon. As if summoned by his words, Lucy chose that moment to wake up with the particular cry that meant she was hungry and didn't plan to wait patiently. Emma hurried to the carrier, lifting her daughter and automatically beginning the swaying motion that sometimes bought her a few extra minutes before full-scale baby meltdown occurred. She's got good timing, Marcus said with amusement. Knows exactly when the workday should pause for meals. Back at the main house, Marcus insisted that Emma join him for lunch. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, and he moved around it with the efficiency of someone who'd been cooking for himself for years. Within minutes, he'd assembled sandwiches for both of them and warmed Lucy's bottle. Can I ask you something? Emma said as she fed Lucy while trying to eat her own lunch one-handed. Shoot. Why are you being so kind to us, and don't say it's just because you need help. You could have hired any number of people who wouldn't come with a baby and a prissy pig. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the kitchen window toward the mountains. Few years back, I was in a position where I needed help, and someone took a chance on me. Figured it was time to pay that forward. Emma sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had their private wounds and private reasons for the choices they made. Besides, Marcus continued, good help is hard to find, and you've already proven you know what you're doing. The baby situation is manageable, and honestly, Rosie is growing on me. She's got more personality than most people I know. As if she'd heard her name being mentioned, Rosie appeared at the kitchen window, having somehow made her way from her pen to the main house. She stood on her hind legs with her front hooves on the windowsill, peering inside with what appeared to be curiosity about the lunch proceedings. How did she get out of her pen? Emma asked, alarmed. Marcus looked out the window and chuckled. Looks like your grandmother's pig is smarter than I gave her credit for. She figured out how to work the latch. Emma groaned. I should have warned you. Rosie is an escape artist. She can open most simple latches, and she's got a talent for finding weak spots and fencing. Well, she's not causing any trouble, just seems curious about what we're up to. Marcus stood up and opened the back door. Hey there, Rosie. You checking up on us? Rosie made a soft sound that might have been a greeting and stepped delicately onto the porch. Up close, Emma was amazed to see that the pig had somehow managed to keep herself completely clean despite her outdoor adventures. She really doesn't like being dirty, does she? Marcus observed, crouching down to Rosie's level. Most pigs would be covered in mud by now. My grandmother always said Rosie thought she was above such common pig behavior. She'll walk around mud puddles instead of through them, and if she accidentally steps in something dirty, she'll find a way to clean herself off. Marcus reached out slowly, letting Rosie sniff his hand before gently scratching behind her ears. The pig leaned into the attention with obvious pleasure, making soft grunting sounds of contentment. She likes you, Emma said, surprised. Rosie was usually cautious around strangers. Animals and I understand each other, Marcus said simply. We both prefer straight talk and honest intentions. Lucy had finished her bottle and was making the drowsy sounds that meant nap time was approaching. Emma shifted her daughter to her shoulder, patting her back gently to encourage a burp. What's the plan for this afternoon? Emma asked. Equipment maintenance. I've got a tractor that's been making concerning noises, and there's a water pump that needs attention before winter. Marcus stood up, giving Rosie one final pat. Nothing too complicated, but it needs doing. I can help with that. I'm pretty good with engines. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Another hidden talent? My dad believed in teaching practical skills, said a person who could fix their own equipment would never be completely helpless. Emma felt the familiar pang that came with memories of her father. He was right about a lot of things. They spent the afternoon working on the ranch's machinery, and Emma found herself enjoying the puzzle-solving aspect of mechanical repair. The tractor's problem turned out to be a loose belt, easily fixed once they located the issue. The water pump required more extensive work, but Emma's steady hands and mechanical intuition proved valuable in the cramped space around the pump housing. Lucy napped peacefully in her carrier, positioned where Emma could keep an eye on her while they worked. Rosie had appointed herself as the baby's guardian, lying in the shade nearby and occasionally opening one eye to check on the sleeping infant. "That pig really has adopted your daughter," Marcus observed during a break in their work. Emma looked over to where Rosie was maintaining her vigil. "She did the same thing with me when I was little. Whenever I'd nap outside at my grandmother's house, Rosie would park herself nearby and keep watch. Grandma Rose used to say Rosie had better maternal instincts than some humans." "Your grandmother sounds like she was a special woman." "She was." Emma's voice caught slightly. "She raised me after my parents died. Taught me everything I know about being strong and independent. I miss her every day." Marcus nodded, understanding. "Losing the people who shaped us is hard. But it sounds like she raised you well. You're doing right by her memory." As the afternoon wore on, Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. The work was satisfying, Lucy was content, and Marcus proved to be good company, knowledgeable without being condescending, funny without being crude, and patient with both her questions and her daughter's occasional needs for attention. When evening approached and it was time to return to the cabin, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the satisfaction of a productive day well spent. "Same time tomorrow?" Marcus asked as they gathered up their tools. "I'll be ready," Emma promised, meaning it completely. That evening, after Lucy was fed and settled for the night, Emma sat on the cabin's small porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink that seemed too vivid to be real, and the air carried the crisp promise of the winter that would come soon enough. Rosie had somehow made her way back to her pen behind the barn, apparently content with her day of exploration and supervision. Emma could see the pig in the distance, once again arranging her sleeping area with meticulous precision. For the first time since her grandmother's death, Emma allowed herself to think beyond simple survival. Maybe, just maybe, she and Lucy had found not just a place to stay, but a place to build a life. The work was satisfying, Marcus was fair and kind, and the ranch felt like the kind of place where a child could grow up healthy and happy. It was too early to count on anything permanent, Emma reminded herself. This was still just a trial period, and she had to prove herself worthy of Marcus's continued trust. But for tonight, with Lucy sleeping peacefully and the Colorado stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, Emma allowed herself to hope that their journey might finally be leading them home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. She was ready for both. 3 weeks into October, the first real snowstorm of the season hit Cedar Ridge Ranch with a vengeance that reminded everyone why Colorado winters were legendary. Emma woke in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of wind howling around the cabin like a living thing, rattling the windows and making the walls creak ominously. Snow was falling so heavily that she couldn't see the barn through the white curtain that had descended over the ranch. Lucy was fussing in her pack-and-play, disturbed by the strange sounds and the drop in temperature that even the cabin's wood stove couldn't completely ward off. Emma bundled her daughter in extra blankets and held her close, feeling the baby's tiny body shiver despite the layers of warmth. By the time Marcus appeared at her door, stomping snow off his boots and looking like a walking snowman, Emma had the wood stove burning hot and coffee brewing. His face was red with cold, and ice crystals clung to his eyebrows and the stubble on his jaw. "Storm came in faster than predicted," he said, gratefully accepting the mug of coffee Emma offered. "We've got problems." Emma's stomach dropped. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd proven herself capable and reliable, working alongside Marcus to prepare the ranch for winter. They'd moved cattle to lower pastures, repaired fencing, and stockpiled feed. But she'd also learned enough about ranching to know that even the best preparations could be overwhelmed by a truly severe storm. "How bad?" she asked, automatically checking on Lucy, who had quieted in the warmth of the cabin. "Bad enough. We've got about 50 heads stranded in the upper pasture. The gate to bring them down got blocked by a fallen tree sometime during the night. If we don't get them moved to shelter soon, we're going to lose animals." Emma felt her heart rate spike. She'd grown attached to the cattle over the past weeks, learning to recognize individual animals and their personalities. The thought of them dying in the storm because of human failure to act made her sick. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus studied her for a moment, his gray eyes serious. It's dangerous work in this weather. Zero visibility. Ice under the snow, cattle spooked by the storm. I've got Jake and Tommy heading out on the ATVs, but we need someone on horseback to guide the herd down the mountain trail. It's not safe work for someone with a baby depending on them. Emma looked down at Lucy, who was now sleeping peacefully despite the chaos outside. The baby trusted her completely, depended on her for everything. But Emma also knew that if the ranch failed, if they lost a significant portion of the herd, her job would disappear, along with Marcus's livelihood. "I can do it," she said quietly. "I know those trails, and I'm good on horseback." "Emma, if something happens to you out there, what happens to Lucy?" The question hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Emma had been asking herself the same thing every day since they'd arrived at Cedar Ridge. What kind of mother put her child's security at risk by taking on dangerous work? But what kind of mother failed to do everything in her power to secure that child's future? "Mrs. Patterson," Emma said suddenly, referring to Marcus's nearest neighbor, an elderly woman who lived alone about 2 miles down the valley. She mentioned that she used to run a daycare. Maybe she could watch Lucy for a few hours. Marcus shook his head. "Roads are already impassable. Nobody's going anywhere until this storm passes." Emma felt trapped between impossible choices. Through the cabin window, she could see Rosie huddled in the 3-sided shelter Marcus had built for her behind the barn. Even the pig, despite her usual fastidiousness, was covered in snow and looked miserable. "There has to be another option," Emma said, more to herself than to Marcus. "Actually," Marcus said slowly, "there might be. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, she's snowed in at the main house. She raised 4 kids of her own and helped with my nephew when he was little. She's good with babies." Emma had met Mrs. Chen several times over the past weeks. The older woman was kind, competent, and had often asked about Lucy's well-being. If Emma had to trust her daughter to someone else, Mrs. Chen would be a good choice. "You think she'd be willing? Let's go ask her." The trip from the cabin to the main house, normally a pleasant 5-minute walk, became a treacherous journey through knee-deep snow and wind that tried to knock them off their feet. Emma carried Lucy bundled in blankets, protecting the baby's face from the stinging snow while Marcus broke trail ahead of them. Mrs. Chen met them at the door, having seen them coming from the kitchen window. She was a small, energetic woman in her 60s with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. "This storm is a monster," she said, ushering them inside and immediately reaching for Lucy. "Let me see this little angel. She looks cold." Within minutes, Mrs. Chen had Lucy settled in the warm kitchen, had assessed her needs with the efficiency of an experienced mother, and had agreed to watch the baby while Emma joined the cattle rescue operation. "You be careful out there," Mrs. Chen said, fixing Emma with a stern look. "This baby needs her mother coming home safe." Emma kissed Lucy's forehead, breathing in the sweet baby scent that never failed to calm her fears. "I'll be back as soon as I can." "I know you will. Now go save those poor animals before they freeze." The barn was warm compared to the howling wind outside, but Emma could feel the cold seeping through the walls. The horses were restless, sensing the storm's intensity and the humans' urgency. Marcus had already saddled Whiskey, his most reliable mount, and was preparing Dakota for Emma. "Dakota's sure-footed in snow," Marcus said, checking the mare's tack one final time. "She's also smart enough to find her way home if things go badly. Trust her instincts out there." Emma swung into the saddle, feeling the familiar comfort of being on horseback despite the circumstances. Dakota shifted beneath her, alert and ready for work. The mare's ears swiveled constantly, monitoring the sounds of the storm and the preparation around her. Jake and Tommy, Marcus's 2 ranch hands, were already mounted and waiting near the barn door. Both men looked grim but determined, bundled in heavy coats and equipped with the ropes and tools they'd need to move frightened cattle through a blizzard. "Visibility's about 10 feet, Jake reported. Radio contact's spotty because of the storm, but we've got the emergency channel clear. Stick together, watch for ice, and if anyone gets separated, head straight back to the barn." Marcus mounted Whiskey and moved to the barn door. "Emma, You take the left flank when we reach the herd. Keep them moving toward the trail, but don't push too hard. Spooked cattle in a storm can bolt in the wrong direction and end up over a cliff. The barn door slid open, and they rode out into a world transformed by the storm. Snow fell so heavily that it seemed solid, a white wall that swallowed sound and sight. The wind cut through Emma's heavy coat like it was made of paper, and within minutes she couldn't feel her face. Dakota picked her way carefully through the deep snow, her hooves finding solid footing where Emma's eyes saw only white confusion. The mare's warmth rose up through Emma's legs, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this whiteout hell. The ride to the upper pasture took twice as long as normal, the horses struggling through drifts that reached their bellies in places. Emma lost sight of the other riders several times, following Dakota's instincts and the faint impressions of hoofprints that filled with snow almost as soon as they were made. When they finally reached the stranded cattle, Emma's heart sank. The animals were huddled together in a tight group, their backs to the wind, ice coating their faces and flanks. They looked miserable and defeated, standing in snow up to their bellies with nowhere to go. The fallen tree blocking their escape route was massive, a pine that must have been growing for decades before the storm's wind finally brought it down. Its trunk stretched completely across the gate opening, too large to move and too high for cattle to jump over or crawl under. "We'll have to lead them around through the old logging trail," Marcus shouted over the wind, his voice barely audible despite being only a few feet away. "It's longer and steeper, but it's the only way down." The work of moving 50 frightened cattle through a blizzard was like something from a nightmare. The animals were reluctant to leave their huddled position, and when they finally got moving, they wanted to head back to their familiar shelter, rather than down an unfamiliar trail into the storm. Emma found herself relying on instincts she'd developed years ago, reading the cattle's behavior and positioning Dakota to guide the herd without forcing confrontation. The mare seemed to understand the urgency, working with Emma to turn stragglers back to the group and keep the herd moving in the right direction. Halfway down the logging trail, disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind, stronger than anything they'd experienced yet, sent a tree branch crashing down directly in front of the led cattle. The animals panicked, scattering in all directions despite the riders' attempts to keep them together. Emma found herself chasing a group of about 15 cattle that had broken away from the main herd, heading toward a section of the mountain that she knew dropped off into a steep ravine. Dakota was breathing hard, steam rising from her coat as she worked to stay ahead of the panicked animals. "Turn them," Emma called to Dakota, as if the horse could understand her words. "We have to turn them before they reach the edge." Dakota seemed to know exactly what was needed. The mare put on a burst of speed that Emma hadn't known she possessed, racing through the snow to get ahead of the lead steer. Once in position, Dakota planted herself directly in the animal's path, refusing to move despite their size and momentum. The lead steer slowed, confused by this small horse that wouldn't get out of his way. The rest of the group bunched up behind him, milling in confusion. Emma used the moment to position Dakota for a sweeping turn that would guide the cattle back toward the main trail. It worked, but just barely. As the group of cattle began following Dakota's lead back toward safety, Emma heard a sound that made her blood freeze. A long, low crack, followed by a rumble that she felt through the ground as much as heard through the air. "Avalanche!" The word tore from her throat, though she knew no one could hear her over the storm. A section of the mountainside above them, overloaded with new snow and destabilized by the wind, was giving way. Emma could see the white wall of snow and debris rushing down toward them, moving faster than any horse could run. Dakota didn't need encouragement. The mare wheeled and bolted toward lower ground, carrying Emma away from the avalanche path at a dead run through snow that reached the horse's chest. Behind them, Emma could hear the roar of thousands of tons of snow and rock, reshaping the mountainside. When Dakota finally slowed, both horse and rider were trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Emma looked back toward where they'd been moments before and saw nothing but a field of white debris. The cattle they'd been chasing were nowhere to be seen. "Please let them have made it," Emma whispered, though she knew the chances were slim. Dakota picked her way carefully down the mountain, following instincts and landmarks that Emma couldn't see through the storm. It felt like hours before they finally emerged from the white hell of the upper mountain and saw the welcome lights of the Cedar Ridge buildings glowing through the snow. Marcus was waiting in the barn, ice-covered and looking as exhausted as Emma felt. His face showed relief when he saw her, quickly followed by concern as he took in her condition. "Where are the others?" Emma asked as Marcus helped her dismount from Dakota's back. "Jake and Tommy made it back 20 minutes ago with most of the herd. We lost about 15 head when that avalanche hit." Marcus's voice was heavy with the weight of livestock loss. "Any sign of the group you were chasing?" Emma shook her head, not trusting her voice. 15 cattle meant thousands of dollars in lost income, but more than that, it meant animals she'd known individually were dead because of a storm and bad luck. "It's not your fault," Marcus said, seeing her expression. "You did everything right. Hell, you probably saved more lives than we lost. If you hadn't turned that group when you did, they would have gone right over the cliff and taken some of the main herd with them." Emma nodded, but the guilt still sat heavy in her chest. She'd known the risks when she'd taken on ranch work, but knowing and experiencing were different things. "How's Lucy?" she asked as they led Dakota into her stall and began the process of cooling down the exhausted mare. "Safe and warm. Mrs. Chen's got her completely spoiled by now. Fed her lunch and has been singing Chinese lullabies for the past hour." Marcus paused in his work, studying Emma's face. "You saved lives today, Emma. Don't forget that in all the guilt over the ones we couldn't save." The storm continued for 2 more days, trapping everyone on the ranch and giving Emma too much time to think about the cattle they'd lost. Mrs. Chen proved to be a godsend, caring for Lucy with the competence of a professional and the warmth of a grandmother. The babies seemed to thrive under the older woman's attention, reaching developmental milestones and showing a contentment that Emma hadn't seen since her grandmother's death. When the storm finally passed, leaving the ranch buried under 3 feet of snow, the real work began. They had to dig out feed for the surviving cattle, check on equipment that had been damaged by wind and ice, and assess the full extent of their losses. Emma threw herself into the work with an intensity that worried Marcus. She was up before dawn and worked until well after dark, pushing herself harder than anyone expected, and accepting no help with tasks she could handle alone. "You're going to burn yourself out," Marcus warned one evening as Emma prepared to head back to the cabin after a 14-hour workday. "I'm fine," Emma said automatically, the response she'd been giving to anyone who expressed concern about her pace. "No, you're not. You're running on guilt and adrenaline, and that's not sustainable." Marcus blocked her path to the door, his expression serious. "Talk to me, Emma. What's really going on?" Emma felt something break loose inside her chest, a dam of emotion that she'd been holding back since the day of the storm. "I almost got those cattle killed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I'd been faster, or smarter, or more experienced, maybe they'd still be alive. And maybe they'd all be dead, along with you and Dakota. Maybe the whole herd would have panicked and gone over that cliff. Maybe. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't live your life in the land of maybe, Emma. You made the best decisions you could with the information you had, and you saved more lives than you lost. But what if I hadn't? What if something had happened to me up there? Lucy would have been an orphan, and it would have been my fault for taking unnecessary risks." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Emma could see him weighing his words carefully. "Can I tell you something about unnecessary risks?" Emma nodded, too emotionally drained to do anything else. 5 years ago, when my father was dying of cancer, I had a choice to make. I could stay here and take care of him, or I could take a job offer in Denver that would have paid 3 times what the ranch makes in a good year. The smart thing, the financially responsible thing, would have been to take the job, sell the ranch, and set myself up for a secure future. Emma waited, sensing there was more to the story. Instead, I stayed, watched my father die slowly, took on debt to keep the ranch running, and turned down opportunities that might never come again. People called it an unnecessary risk, said I was throwing my life away for sentiment and stubbornness. "But you don't regret it?" Marcus smiled, and Emma saw a warmth in his expression that she'd rarely glimpsed before. "Not for a second. Because some things are worth taking risks for. My father died knowing his life's work would continue. The ranch is still here, still supporting the community, still providing a home for animals and people who need one, like you and Lucy." Emma felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "That's different. Your father was dying anyway. Those cattle died because of my decisions." Those cattle died because of a storm and an avalanche that no one could have predicted or prevented. You saved the ones you could save. And you did it while risking your own life for animals that weren't even yours. That's not recklessness, Emma. That's courage. The words hit Emma like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were kind. She'd been carrying guilt and self-recrimination for days, and Marcus's simple statement of faith in her judgment shattered her carefully constructed wall of emotional protection. The tears came then, weeks of suppressed fear and exhaustion and grief pouring out in great, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Marcus didn't try to stop her or offer empty comfort. He simply stood there, solid and patient, letting her cry until the storm of emotion passed. "I'm sorry," Emma finally managed, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I don't usually fall apart like that." "When's the last time you did fall apart? When's the last time you let yourself feel everything you've been carrying?" Emma thought about it and realized she couldn't remember. Since her grandmother's death, she'd been focused solely on survival, on keeping herself and Lucy fed and housed and safe. There hadn't been time or space for grief or fear or any of the other emotions that came with loss and uncertainty. "I can't afford to fall apart," she said. "Lucy needs me to be strong. Lucy needs you to be human. She needs you to take care of yourself, to ask for help when you need it, and to trust that other people can help keep both of you safe." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Mrs. Chen appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying Lucy and wearing the expression of someone who'd been eavesdropping without shame. "This baby has been asking for her mama," Mrs. Chen announced, though Lucy was clearly content in the older woman's arms. "And her mama looks like she needs some baby snuggles." Emma reached for her daughter, and Lucy immediately cuddled against her chest with the complete trust that only babies could show. The warm weight of her child, the sweet scent of baby shampoo and innocence, helped ground Emma in the present moment rather than the guilt-filled past or uncertain future. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus said, "would you be willing to help out with Lucy on a more regular basis? Emma's proving invaluable around the ranch, but babies and cattle work don't always mix well." The older woman's face lit up. "I would love that. This little one reminds me of my own granddaughter back in California. It would be nice to have a baby around the house again." Emma felt a surge of relief so strong it was almost overwhelming. The childcare problem that had been keeping her awake at night, worrying about winter weather and safety and all the ways her situation could become impossible, suddenly had a solution. "I can pay you," Emma said quickly. "Whatever the going rate is for childcare." Mrs. Chen waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. I'm already being paid to take care of this house. Taking care of one sweet baby is no extra work. Besides, she'll keep me company during the long winter days." That night, after Lucy was fed and settled in her crib, Emma sat on the cabin porch, despite the cold, and looked up at stars that seemed impossibly bright in the clear mountain air. The storm had passed, leaving the ranch blanketed in snow that sparkled like diamonds under the moonlight. Rosie had somehow managed to keep herself relatively clean even during the blizzard, and she appeared around the corner of the cabin like a pink ghost in the snow. The pig approached the porch cautiously as if asking permission to join Emma in her late-night contemplation. "Come on up, girl," Emma said softly. "There's room for both of us." Rosie climbed the porch steps with dignity and settled beside Emma's chair, somehow managing to avoid the patches of snow that had drifted onto the wooden planks. The pig's presence was comforting in a way Emma couldn't explain, a connection to her grandmother and to a time when life had seemed more certain. "What do you think, Rosie?" Emma asked, scratching behind the pig's ears. "Think we're really home this time?" Rosie made a soft sound that might have been contentment and leaned into Emma's touch. In the distance, Emma could see lights still on in the main house, where Marcus was probably doing the endless paperwork that kept her ranch running. Over the past month, Emma had learned that Marcus Webb was nothing like what she'd expected when she'd first driven up to Cedar Ridge Ranch. He was kinder than he pretended to be, more generous than he could probably afford to be, and more patient with her learning curve than she'd had any right to expect. He'd given her and Lucy a home when they'd had nowhere else to go, and he'd done it without making her feel like a charity case. More than that, he'd made her feel capable again, valued, like she had something worthwhile to contribute to the world beyond simply keeping her daughter alive and fed. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of brilliant sunshine that only came after major storms. Emma woke to the sound of Lucy babbling happily in her crib, and for the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely rested. Marcus was already in the barn when she arrived for work, but instead of the heavy atmosphere of crisis management that had dominated the past few days, there was something lighter in his demeanor. "Good news," he said, as she approached. "Found 3 of the cattle we thought we'd lost. They took shelter in a box canyon about 2 miles north and rode out the storm. Jake's bringing them down this morning." Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "That's wonderful. What about the others?" Marcus's expression grew more serious. "Still missing. Probably buried under that avalanche. But 3 out of 15 is better than I'd hoped for after a storm like that." They spent the morning checking on the surviving cattle, making sure the animals had recovered from their ordeal and assessing what supplies would be needed to get through the rest of winter. Emma found herself working alongside Marcus with an ease that felt natural, their conversation flowing between ranch business and the kind of casual observations that marked genuine friendship. It wasn't until they were walking back toward the main buildings for lunch that Marcus brought up the subject Emma had been dreading. "Emma, we need to talk about your situation here." Emma's stomach dropped. "Here it comes," she thought. "He's realized that someone with a baby and a pig is more trouble than she's worth, storm heroics aside." "I know the trial period is almost up," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I understand if you need to make other arrangements." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression puzzled. "Other arrangements?" "Emma, I'm trying to figure out how to make this permanent. You're the best ranch hand I've had in years," Mrs. Chen adores Lucy. "And even Rosie has grown on me. The question isn't whether I want you to stay, it's whether you want to stay." Emma stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're offering me a permanent job?" "I'm offering you a home," Marcus said simply, "for you and Lucy and that prissy pig of yours, if you want it." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than grief and exhaustion. "I want it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than anything." Marcus smiled, and Emma saw genuine warmth and affection in his expression. "Good. Because I was running out of ways to convince you that you belonged here." As they walked toward the house, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death. The sense of being truly home. Not just housed or employed, but home in the deepest sense of the word. A place where she belonged, where Lucy could grow up safe and loved, where even Rosie could maintain her dignified standards while being part of a family. That evening, as Emma tucked Lucy into her crib and listened to her daughter's contented breathing, she allowed herself to plan beyond the next day or week. She thought about Lucy taking her first steps on the ranch's wooden floors, about teaching her daughter to ride horses and care for animals. She thought about seasons changing, about becoming part of the community that surrounded Cedar Ridge Ranch. And sometimes, when she was being completely honest with herself, she thought about Marcus Webb and the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Like she was someone worth knowing, worth keeping safe, worth building a future with. Those thoughts scared her almost as much as they thrilled her, because caring about someone meant risking loss, and Emma had lost enough for one lifetime. But as she watched Lucy sleep in the security of their little cabin, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a ranch settling in for the night, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking. Outside their window, snow continued to fall gently, adding to the blanket of white that covered Cedar Ridge Ranch. But inside the cabin, Emma and Lucy were warm and safe and home at last. Rosie, who had somehow managed to convince Marcus to let her sleep on the enclosed porch during the coldest nights, made soft pig sounds of contentment from her nest of clean blankets. Even the pig, it seemed, had found her place in their unlikely family. And in the morning, Emma knew there would be work to do, and a life to build, and a future to embrace. But for tonight, it was enough to simply be home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.